Taskus On Air presents CX plus you.
Thanks, guys, for joining us. I'm Joe McNamara, the Marketing Director for Risk and Response. I'm joined by a couple of our folks from the Trust and Safety team, Siva and Phil, as well as our Global Head from Risk and Response, Jeff Chugg. And today we're just going to kind of have a conversation around where our two focuses or practices just kind of meet. So before I do that, Phil, why don't you kick us off? Tell the audience a little bit about what you guys do, who you are, kind of background, things like that.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So we are the Trust and Safety team at Taskus. So we are responsible for all of the work related to content moderation, platform safety, as well as all of the wellness and resiliency teams that support those folks around the world. It's a pretty big practice here at Taskus. It's our second largest business. And obviously we are very aligned with the stuff you folks are doing. There's a lot of crossover. We're chasing baddies on the cyber webs. It's kind of what we do.
That should be your signature, right?
Yeah.
Just chasing baddies on the cyber
Chasing
webs.
baddies down the tubes. Yeah, that's
Fantastic.
kind of what we do. And it's kind of what I've been doing for the best part of 15 years in different flavors. So until I wake up one day and I don't want to do that anymore, this is it. You're stuck with me.
Well, I could think of some worse people to be stuck with, i.e. Ideally Jeff Chugg sitting next to me. But no, anyways, I don't know where I was going
That's
with
your
that.
boss.
Yeah, that's my boss. Jeff, why don't you just do the quick intro then?
Sure. Risk and response team. We are everything risk, compliance, fraud. So we fight fraud. We fight money launderers. We fight people who are trying to fake IDs.
So all you college kids out there, look out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no more free booze on Wednesdays and Hooters.
Right. That's right. Wait. There's free. Someone say that.
No, probably not.
No one told me that.
Let me caveat this by saying I've never been to Hooters. I'm just making this up.
Oh man.
Pretty sure they don't have free booze.
So okay, well, and then I don't have much to say about myself, but Siva, why don't you give us a quick intro?
Okay, been about 15 years in trust and safety, fighting fraud, catching bad content and bad actors. Love the role. Pretty excited on the role that I do at Taskus.
Awesome, short and sweet. That's why I like working with Siva. So, like the last fireside chat we did was awesome.
Seriously, the
Well,
point.
we got a chance to kind of talk about what we're doing, where we get to focus on things that kind of cross the lines or blur them. The biggest thing that I'm seeing right now is there's a ton on ChatGPT that's coming out, a ton just around AI and kind of what that means for individual spaces. Folks are starting to get a little anxious about, is my job going away? How is this technology going to essentially become self-aware and turn into Skynet? But, from your perspective, I know that there are a couple different areas, specifically like content moderation or just other areas within your field that you're starting to see, or you've already seen some of the evolved artificial intelligence kind of infiltrate. But like, what are you guys seeing on a day-to-day basis where, is this an accurate depiction of kind of what's going on, or what's really happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will begin by saying I'm kind of an AI skeptic. And what I mean by that is the technology is incredible and it's doing amazing things. Is it going to replace the things that we as humans grasp upon as like the true soul food of life, like music and art and great writing? Is it going to be able to emulate Hemingway or Vermeer or, I don't know, Bob Dylan? Absolutely not. Because all of those things come from a place of human suffering and pain and a journey. But it can do a hell of a lot of things that is cool. Like it can really help you write press releases, or it can help you debug your code, or it can help you maybe cheat on your exams. And this is where we're kind of leaning into, right, with this chat, which is this technology is just a tool. It's how people use it is the problem.
So the ethics.
Yeah, and there's kind of two ways that we're thinking about it at Taskus. And one of them is how do we train the models so that they are better and less likely to do something weird, like recommend you to jump off a bridge or tell you how to make a bomb or give you some insider track to find bad stuff on the internet, which all things that model will do because it's completely, it doesn't know what it doesn't know. So there's sort of a whole element of how do we train the data that feeds these models? How do we do some adversarial testing of the models so that they don't do bad things, and we find out how they break and we find out how do we make them better? This is all work that Taskus is actually doing today. It sounds like science fiction, but it's work we do today around the world, and it's cool. The other element is the pure play moderation, which is working with the generative AI companies to look at the outputs of these models as well as the inputs and actually zap stuff out like, whack-a-mole that shouldn't be there.
I'm curious. One thing I'm curious about, Phil. I've seen a lot of controversy in the field of AI art.
Yeah.
Right, and I think it's the programs from OpenAI and others are getting so good now that they look photorealistic. They look, Have you seen what's going to happen one day when the need arises when someone bans AI generated art or AI generated photos from their platform? Are we going to have to get humans to go in there and tell the difference?
It's a great question. OpenAI themselves have started working on a model to actually detect AI-generated text. I know there's other players in the market who are doing the same. So like any problem of bad content or bad actors on the internet, it'll be an intersection of technology and humans. You will need the technology to do the scale, to do the sort of lower-hanging stuff, but you'll need humans to both correct where the technology goes wrong and also define what the swim lanes are and define the boundaries and to do advanced QC. So it'll be both. And specifically, the area of art, I think we've seen issues arise. One, we've seen models that are trained on large libraries of stock photos, which tend to be inherently biased in themselves. Lots of pictures of white faces versus brown or black or Asian faces or things like that. So that's a problem because these technologies are then being deployed at scale to the world and are inherently absorbing the biases that are already there, and that's not a great thing. And the second thing is, the whole space of deepfakes. I was just reading an article this morning about those AI-generated videos. So you can have an AI sort of talking head over your content, and it will narrate whatever it is you want, and it looks super photorealistic. And they're being deployed to shed misinformation, and they're being shared as this is a newscaster in this country talking about a thing, and that stuff goes viral, and it gets out of
Or like
control
Tom
quickly.
Cruise, right? I just saw that video, I think late last week. They essentially deepfake Tom Cruise to, I don't even know what he was saying. I think he was denouncing Scientology, which
Sure.
we know he would never do that.
Yeah.
But
And that's the kind of stuff that we have to be careful of. And you're right, it's going to take technology. We're going to need solutions to detect that stuff at the sort of generation stage. And then we're going to need processes and human experts and sort of frameworks that we design to pick it up after it's out in the wild and then to kind of roll back some of the damage. But we're in the infancy of this technology for sure.
And I know that we're seeing, I don't want to call them copycats, but certainly there's an arms race of sorts, I think is what that's being called, just around, Google's technology that they're rolling out, as well as some others that have kind of been in the space that are now just kind of accelerating. But, given kind of the time constraints that we have here, I'm actually on ChatGPT right now. And I asked it a question, and Siva, I'd love to kind of hear your insight into this, but I asked a pretty simple question. So the first one I said was, how are you changing the trust and safety industry? And it had an interesting response. It pretty much said, I'm an AI language model. I don't directly change industries, but OpenAI is committed to developing and promoting safe and trustworthy AI systems. It kind of goes on to talk about the trust and safety industry, though it wasn't super relevant. So then I changed it, and I essentially just said, what are the 5 biggest challenges in the trust and safety space? And it spit out, content moderation, scalability, false positive or negative rate, privacy, and adapting to changing threats. So putting you on the spot here, but from your perspective, what out of those 5 is kind of the greatest challenge in today's industry? And I'm going to kind of add to it, how would AI play a role in potentially, de-escalating the amount of risk here?
By the way, if I'm a human and the answer that I'm going to give to the first question is always basics remain the same. At the intersection of technology and humans, you need policies, you need lexicons, you need guidelines. When an AI moderates or a human moderates, you definitely need to follow the basics. And I think, be it any technology, any company that's going to launch in this space, everyone is going to fall back, as Phil said, on frameworks, on what are the boundaries that these technologies need to operate, and how do we actually look at content for the users to make them safe and feel safe, right? So for me, the top 2 things that definitely emerge as the biggest challenges is how fast can we develop these guidelines, the boundaries and the policies in this space, and 2, how fast and accurately we implement and enforce them, be it in the AI space or in the human space.
A lot of these models, though, I've noticed that people have found ways around the policy, around the guidelines, right? One of the things that I did when I was playing with ChatGPT to begin with was I tried to get it to give itself a name. right? And it didn't want to do that. It was like, no, I'm that's against my programming. I'm not going to adopt an identity because I don't want to deceive people to think that I'm, not a machine.
That comes later.
Yeah, but there's a path that you could go down and slowly get it around there. So I'm like, I told it, well, when you're interacting with kids that are human kids, they react better to, entities that have a name and they can kind of remember. That's easy for them to remember. And so let's just give you a name just for that purpose. And they're like, well, no, we don't want to do that. I'm like, oh, but here's some example names. And I just find that people would really react better between these two names. Like, what would you choose? And I kept pushing, and eventually it chose like a name, it chose like David or something like. And I'm like, great, thanks, David. I started calling it that name, and it would always say like, oh, but just remember that's not my real name. But you keep doing it, and eventually it stops saying that, right? So I'm just curious, like, how do you really set those policy boundaries when you can find a way around it with prompting?
So there's no black and white answer to this. Per my experience, fraudsters get smarter by the day. You create a model to defeat them. The fraudsters get even more smarter and find a way out. That's natural and bound to happen. My response to this would be, how quick are you able to scale your human resources to identify those false positives, identify the gaps, and feed them back into the algos at the right time? The sooner and the faster and the agile way that we do it, the lesser leakages we will have in the false positives. And then I think that's the only way out, but I don't think so there's going to be 100% accuracy in an AI or 100% accuracy in humans.
Yeah, I think at some point, is it worth putting like a hard boundary to say like, okay, well, here's an action that the AI just simply can't take, no matter what, no matter if it's founded, if it is within the policy guidelines, like this step it can never go past this step. Is that something you think would be useful?
I would say yes, to a certain extent. It depends on the complexity of the response and the complexity of the content that you're throwing up at the AI. It changes by nuance, it changes by language, it changes by geography, it changes by the fraudster who's operating in what kind of an environment and how much of content is trying to steal, right? So it's the depth and the scale which matters in this.
But these are questions that ethicists, technologists, and sci-fi futurists and society as a whole has been grappling with since the advent of AI. You think of Isaac Asimov's 3 rules of robotics, which is kind of where you're going with this. Like, are there hard boundaries beyond which we will not pass? And those 3 rules, I don't remember off the heart, but I think the first one is this machine cannot take any action that will cause direct harm to a human. And this machine will not take any direct action that will cause any direct harm to itself, and it won't take any action that will cause that will be in direct violation of a law.
I saw that movie, but it didn't work out so well with Will Smith.
No, it didn't.
I thought it did. I thought it ended well.
Yeah, but that book was written in the 60s, I think, or 50s maybe, right? So the idea of like, what should technology be allowed to do, and how sentient should we allow it to get, and how much of a autonomous decision making should we allow it to have? We've been grappling with that forever. I mean, it's, like I said at the start, it's a tool. It's just a tool. It's like assigning these qualities to a hammer, right? It's what you do with it. You can take a hammer and you can build a house. You can take a hammer and you can do something terrible with it, right? And it's the same here. I think it's less about putting boundaries in place for the hammer and more about making sure society understands what are the benefits and what are the risks of the hammer, and how do I encourage, motivate, and incentivize broader society to use the hammer in the right way.
Yeah, but I've never actually confused a hammer with my contractor, right? However, using chatbots and the like, there are times when I find myself chatting with something I thought was a human, but turns out not to be. Yeah. Do you think companies have an obligation to disclose when you're conversing or chatting or whatever with a non-human?
Do they have an obligation? Maybe. Will they be forced to by regulation in time? Probably. You could see probably will be Europe, and then the rest of the world will follow. You can see regulation passing in time, which makes it obligatory for companies to disclose that kind of information. Like a disclaimer at the top of the chat. This is not a human being. Don't try hitting it and ask for his phone number, right? So again, it's like, culture is leading, regulation is lagging, and those things kind of will always be that way. But yeah, you're right. It's a new era. And I go back to what we said at the start, right? It's about bad actors and bad behaviors. A lot of the stuff doesn't happen if human beings aren't adversarially and actively trying to do bad things with this stuff, right? And some of it is because the companies that build this technology leave the gate wide open for bad stuff, or it's built by people with great intentions but but poor execution, or they've moved too fast, or they haven't done the checks and balances because they're, building the future, and checks and balances doesn't
That'll
kind of
come later.
vibe, right? You build the future first, and you say effort. I'm not sure we can still swear on here. I'm going to the checks and balances, and it's sort of asking for forgiveness and not permission. And I like that approach, but it does leave big, gigantic gaps as you scale and you put your tool in the hands of more and more consumers, and inevitably those bad folks get a hold of it.
Phil Sivo, I know your teams work a lot with dating sites and making sure that the policy guidelines of those dating sites are kind of well within the boundaries of the users, right? What about the propensity for AI to like amplify a bad actor's attitude or acts when it comes to things like love scams, something like that? It basically takes what used to be like one person doing something bad and now like basically infinitely scales that.
You talking more like pig butchering and things like that, where you can essentially, it's a love or a romance scheme where essentially you catfish somebody to the point where you convince them to kind of give you bank account numbers, right, or transfer funds of some kind, and then essentially as soon as that happens, you cut off all communication. And that's
not heard it called pig butchery. Thank you.
It's kind of a graphic title when you think about it, but it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're kind of fattening this relationship up, you're leading them on.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm listening to another podcast right now called Love Janessa, which is exactly about this phenomenon of these like co-opted identities that get used to catfish through romance scams and force folk or encourage folks to send over bank details and money. How could that be superpowered by AI, where you could have some sort of central brain running tens of thousands of these in parallel? Yeah, it's a great question. Probably happening already in some cases. How successfully, I don't know, but certainly that's the kind of 10x, 100x amplifier that a technology like this in the wrong hands can do.
We'll be sure to link that in the show notes, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. But I would imagine too, on the flip side, you mentioned that they're also starting to develop and roll out technology that can identify that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of this cat and mouse back and forth battle, which, my final question is, as we look at it from a business model and specifically through the perspective of TaskUs and what we do for our clients, obviously this is going to be an ongoing and scaling challenge, but what's kind of our response to this?
I think for me, collaboration, identify the right need and the problem for our clients in this space is going to be key. And 2, be agile, fast, and deploy solutions at scale in a most cost-effective manner is going to be very, very critical as for us to be differentiated in this space.
Yeah, and what I would say, I kind of bring it back to the human element, and to quote Bill and Ted, right, you got to just be excellent to each other. And the more we can help folks be excellent to each other, the better the world will be.
Oh man, now I'm blanking on who was their spirit guide? What was his name?
George Carlin?
Yeah, George Carlin played it. But
George
the
Carlin.
character name, yeah.
Oh man, what a great sentiment though. So appreciate it, guys. I know this was kind of short notice, but glad we got a chance to chat with you. Exciting stuff coming from our risk and not only risk and response, but our trust and safety teams. And look forward to having more conversations with you down the road. So thanks again, fellas.
Thanks, guys.